We're doing this in conjunction with Intersys, who've got some fantastic industry knowledge on operational resilience and also on cyber. So as ever, we're recording this. You may have already seen that flash up on your screen. We will post it on our website. It'll be available to you afterwards. There will be the contact details of the presenters, and you know how to get hold of LIIBA. If you don't, then, well, how did you get on this call? So if you have any questions that come up during this, please put them in the chat. We'll get some at the end. If not, obviously, we've got a couple of things to start with, all rolling on that one. So let's do some theme setting. As you know, in the recent weeks, we've had a number of technology challenges and business challenges. You know, there was the incident not long ago with Lloyd's where they closed the system for a couple of days. You know, that caused that. And actually, whilst not actually a system challenge, this was actually the result of us actually closing the systems for the weekend for dress rehearsal operational for the dress rehearsal to the data center move. All of these actually challenged the operational resilience of our businesses, be them cyber, perceived cyber, or actually just working as normal. With all this going on, it made us at LIIBA and our friends at Intersys think that it might be the right time to do a session actually targeting more the operational risk and resilience side of what's going on in the industry and the cyber side of things as well. So hence this session. Obviously, we like to do these sessions regularly, and if anybody else has any ideas about what we can do, please let us know. So that's enough for me because, you know, quite frankly, I'm not the expert on this one. So I will pass you over to Matthew, who will lead the session. We'll remind you to put questions in the chat, and I'll speak to you at the end. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, James. Kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. So just to start off to say that both Catherine and I will be presenting. Catherine, allow you to introduce yourself.
So I've been in and around working and consulting for the insurance industry and risk management for the last 20 odd years. Currently Director of Enterprise Risk at Intersys, responsible for some supply chain risk software that we use. So that's my background.
Thanks. So who's Intersys? We're a fairly small team, 40 people, managed service provider. We've got a focus on security. We do a lot of IT and cybersecurity operations centers and cybersecurity solutions for about 100 companies, Microsoft Gold partners. We're used to working in highly regulated industries, including insurance, got some large insurance customers, as well as very many life sciences and pharmaceutical companies. As Catherine said, we also develop software. We manage our own and write our own supply chain risk management software that's used by some of the world's largest life science organizations. That's enough of our intro. We've also very kindly our friends in ORIC, who many of you may know, ORIC International, they provided some further insurance industry insight, data and analysis, which I hope will add some color to the landscape, and it'll certainly independently outline and highlight some of the challenges. I think we've even got some data around the capital that insurers are setting aside for losses. So fairly basic structure to this presentation. We'll just highlight where we're going with this, what's the problem, why do I need operational resilience, and practical steps to take. That'll come on to, if we have time, a few technical and operational strategies, followed by a question and answer. So we're not going to, although we've got industry insight from ORIC to help quantify financial risks to insurers, we're not going to dwell on cyber insurance placing. I have seen some cyber policy app forms which demonstrate there's slightly less understanding than there should be for people underwriting the perils. But I think it doesn't matter whether you're ticking a CPD box or just here to try and help strengthen your brokerage. Hopefully there'll be something for everyone here. So the diagram on the right here is based on an industry standard, the NIST security framework, which is one of our recommendations as a technical response to the operational risks and challenges, comparable to things like ISO 27001. We'll come on to that. I understand the slides will be made available afterwards. So if I hand over to Catherine.
So what's the issue? What's the definition of operational resilience? Well, it means very different things to different people. It's a very broad church, but the bottom line is it's not just about compliance. It's about being able to keep your business running, regardless of what the world throws at you. So just looking at some different definitions from the financial sector, Start with insurance, beautifully complicated. An operationally resilient insurer is one that can encounter, withstand, mitigate, recover, and learn from the impact of a broad range of events that have the potential to disrupt the normal course of business. The banks put it slightly more succinctly, a bank's ability to deliver critical operations in the face of disruption. So those are some of the definitions. We're going to try and put a bit of more understanding about what that means in practice. But having said it's a very broad church, today we're really just going to focus on those technical and information related risks that have the potential to sink your business and how you can fend against them.
So what's the issue? We know the insurance market is becoming more of a target for some of the scenarios we're going to talk about later. So GCHQ's 2021 survey says 8% of the insurance sector uses out-of-date computers that are vulnerable. A Black Kite survey said 20% of the top 99 insurance carriers have a high rate of vulnerability to ransomware. We know from history things like the highest ransom payment ever made was CNA, 40 million, I think. And of course, we've got some non-cyber threats that still affect us. So for example, the Lloyd's outage in October, I think that began due to suspicious activity. So larger firms are obliged to comply with the FCA's regulations. I think if you're here and you're from a larger firm, you're already likely to have a team dedicated to OpRes challenges. I think it only applies to organizations that have sort of audited particular standards and over 35 million profit. So we just move on to examples of recent business continuity issues. So I mentioned the CNA insurance and the unusual activity that prompted the recent outage. So we had these 5 days of shutdown or disconnection from the systems. I'm sure many of you will know a lot more about this than I do. It's been many years since I worked within the insurance market, but the investigation found no evidence of compromise. We've got other examples such as the TSB migration 2018, 2 million customers couldn't bank online due to a rushed migration. Revlon's ERP system in 2018, 64 million loss and in a 7% drop in their share price in 24 hours, which prompted an investor lawsuit. Again, that was due to a poor migration. French bank LCL 2021, customers couldn't see each other's accounts when they logged on. British Airways 2019, 100 cancelled flights, 200 disrupted, as well as they had a data breach of 500,000 records, customer records in the same year. RBS NatWest, I could go on. Knight Capital, 440 million lost for a trading system glitch. And of course, digital transformation challenges as well. So, you know, we've got the challenges of Blueprint 2 coming up. Things like the Post Office's Fujitsu Horizon are some salient lessons there. So I'll just move on to Catherine.
I do like the way your background's gone an ominous dark sort of shade in the as you were recounting all those horror stories. So,
I'll go and wave my hand so the lights will turn on.
So I was looking for a nice, simple risk management life cycle diagram that explains a risk-based approach to operational resilience. And instead, I came up with the FCA's approach from its consultation document of 2019. So on the face of it, it looks complicated. But for anyone that's familiar with the risk-based approach advocated by 27001, which is the ISO standard for the management of information security, then you'll be pleased to know that the approach to operational resilience is actually very similar. So the process follows these fundamental principles. Start by identifying your critical business services. So these are the ones that, if disrupted, could cause harm to your consumers or market integrity. Then identify and document the people, processes, technologies, facilities, and information that support these critical services. So in information security terms, these are your information assets, your servers, your systems, your applications, your infrastructure. Then set tolerances for each of these critical business services. So these tolerances are the threshold for maximum tolerable disruption. So in the IT world, these are your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives, your RTOs and your RPOs. And they indicate how much downtime with the RTOs that a business can tolerate and how much data with the RPOs that a business can withstand losing without it being a critical loss. So those are your tolerances that you set. And that's the fundamental steps to having a sound resilience plan. But no plan is real unless it's tested. And this approach advocates using scenarios to test the ability to remain within these impact tolerances when faced with a range of severe but credible disruption scenarios. Once you've done your test, take the lessons learned from those processes to prioritize and implement improvement actions, which are aimed at decreasing the likelihood of something going wrong. And if it does go wrong, having contingency plans to minimize the impact. So again, I think we've probably gone a long way to answering why we need operational resilience, but quite simply, it's about protecting your business, the longevity, the long-term profitability and health of your business. But it's also about protecting your staff. If your team isn't trained and prepared to deal with the worst scenarios, then this can make very impactful scenarios even more stressful when they happen. Act as if something's going to happen, plan for something to happen. That's the advice given by the FCA. Then, of course, there are the compliance obligations that you can't ignore from various regulators, FCA, Bank of England in the UK and Basel in Europe. So hopefully we're starting to convince you of the need for doing something in this arena, but perhaps the more relevant question is how to convince the key decision makers, the budget holders in your business, of the need to invest time and money in this. So this is where we look to an organisation that is all about operational risk. It collects event data, it shares experience, it provides thought leadership. So this is our friends and partners at ORIC International. So we have a quote from Carolyn Coombe, who's the CEO of ORIC. I'll let you read that at your leisure when you get the slides back, but basically she's saying the cost of doing nothing to combat these non-financial risks could be fatal to your business. And ORIC have an extensive set of tools and processes to help you identify blind spots and deepen the understanding of non-financial risks. And we're very fortunate today in that they've shared the results of their most recent workshops on a particular approach that they use to deep dive into operational risks called the scenario universe. So here are the results, hot off the press, of their most recent scenario workshops, arranged into the top 10 operational risk scenarios that are most likely to occur, in the opinion of the membership, split up into large, medium, and small firms. You can see the criteria for what large, medium, and small at the base of the slide. So these scenarios are commonly defined benchmark scenarios, and out of the whole spectrum of operational risk, we've highlighted the information and systems related scenarios. So I found these results very interesting. For the large firms, the extended IT or system, catastrophic system failure scenario and the cyber attack scenario actually come in at number 9 and number 10. So this isn't what keeps the risk managers at big firms awake at night. Now, the assumption is that this is because the big companies have already had to embrace the operational resilience targets. Therefore, they feel it's mitigated, under control, and the risks are minimized. Just bear in mind that these are likelihoods of occurrence that the ranking is based on, not the impact. So the impact could still be very significant for these large firms, but this is the likelihood that they're putting down the list. By contrast, medium firms see the extended IT and system failure scenario as their third most likely scenario and cyber attack their fifth, whilst for small firms, extended or system failures is the number 1 worry. So to me, this is saying something about the extent of preparedness for these risks, that preparedness is dependent on the maturity of the OpRes framework within these companies. i.e. large businesses have already been forced through governance initiative to manage and minimize these risks. So they feel they're in a better position. So that's the kind of future-looking opinion-based side of things. If it's hard data that you need, then this chart shows the actual business disruption and system failure events. So this is a cut on the bigger data set, just focusing on the area we're talking about, that are reported anonymously to ORIC's data collection system every quarter. So again, this is hot off the press, but consequently, it's not a complete year's data for 2022, just the first 2 quarters. But nonetheless, it is indicative of the overall trend. And this trend indicates the rate of rise of frequency is leveling off in recent years. Perhaps that's not surprising, given that there's 2 years of COVID and staff working from home and perhaps not reporting everything. But what's even more compelling is what's happening with the severity of events. So this is the same data set, that rather than looking at the frequency of events, it's looking at the severity and grouping loss events into 3 different year groups and 3 different bands of financial impact. So still only Q1 and Q data. But if you focus on what's happened in the first 2 quarters of 2022, that's the yellow bars, you can see there's been a shift of events from the 10 to 100K impact range to the 100K to a million impact range. Whereas in 2017 and 2020, the orange bar, 67% of the events were below 100K. Now only 50% fall into that lower band. So the conclusion is that the event severity is increasing based on real members' data. So finally, from ORIC, we have their perception, their membership's perception on the most significant ongoing challenges across the whole gambit of operational risks. The biggest challenge, according to membership, is third-party cooperation. So this is about persuading your critical external suppliers to meet the same standards that's demanded of your business. But this isn't just for IT and security partners, although that's an area that we know some third parties do struggle to keep up with. This can be related to your outsourced regulatory, HR, legal functions, your partners that support different aspects of your business. But let's face it, it's not surprising that this is the biggest area of concern, because if this means you need to ask more from your suppliers, you need to ask them to do something extra or different, that probably isn't going to happen unless they're paid to do that. Which brings us to number 2. The next biggest challenge is the cost of remediation. Budgets simply don't have the headroom for mitigation and improvement projects. So, for example, in IT terms, if we're talking about the upgrading of legacy IT solutions to be more resilient to security threats, then this is an expensive pastime, not only in cost, but in terms of people's time. These improvement projects normally come on top of the day job, particularly for smaller companies where people are forced to wear multiple hats and really don't have the capacity to take this on. So that's it from ORIC, a little bit of current data around the current challenges. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks. I'll just move on to talking about some of the practical steps. So really, it's about a methodical risk-based approach, as Catherine had said. So it's about being proportionate to your organization, your business. So small brokers might have a very small, basic RAG-rated risk register, red, amber, green. Larger brokers clearly have far more complex risk management maturity patterns. And if we're talking about prevention, layered security for prevention and a rapid response for contingency, both of those aim to reduce the likelihood and reduce the impact. And I think we should ask what's likely to be your biggest operational risk. Now, clearly, if you've done this exercise and you've got quite a mature approach to it, you'll know, or you'll have a reasonable idea. But perhaps it's as Catherine's mentioned, the third-party risk or supplier failure. Things like physical premises dependency used to rank high for those of us who are working the insurance market during the Bishopsgate bombing days, for example. Some of those scenarios have been tested many times in recent years with COVID and working from home. Ransomware still and cyber threats still rate very highly on most of those, as evidenced by that ORIC data for the sub 1 billion organizations. And again, if it's about change management and migrations, then it's all around ensuring people have the shared vision, management buy-in, change resistance, understood it, speed, not too fast, adoption levels, having a shared vision. So for most small organizations, and dare I say it, smaller brokers, the largest operational risk, one of the largest risks is likely to be cyber breach, ransomware. So I'll come back to those later in the presentation.
So just kind of running with that biggest risk being cyber ransomware, cyber attack. As Matt mentioned, we like to use the, as IT nerds, we like to use the NIST risk management framework, which is what you can see here. It's an American standard and therefore highly prescriptive, but very comprehensive to take you through each step of a secure information management system. So if we're talking about, in terms of how we can manage that, ransomware risk, what we're looking to do is reduce the frequency, the likelihood of it happening. So that's all about your identification and your protect steps, providing protection to your business systems to stop that threat from getting in the first place. And then if we accept it's happened, the final three phases around detect, respond, recover are all about minimizing impact, detecting an event as soon as it happens, isolating it, limiting the scope of the impact of it, responding quickly with your highly trained response and recovery teams, and therefore minimizing the downstream impact. So that's the theory. Matt's going to give you a bit more on the practicalities.
Yep. So we'll just talk a bit about those angles of attack, reducing likelihood and reducing impact. So first angle of attack in ransomware, of course, cyber threat, thing we want to have as a core objective is to decrease the frequency, decrease the likelihood of it happening. And that's pretty much a core objective of very many cybersecurity operations centers. So Intersys runs SOC for a number of organizations, insurance, pharmaceutical, etc., life science variously. And it's about these onions, the security layers that gradually build up to give you a sort of a warmer feeling and a better security posture. Again, that's all about having buy-in, agreeing a roadmap, having budgets, focusing on remediation, challenging third parties and supplier challenges. That might include things like writing RPOs and RTOs into your contracts if you've got some dependencies on them. And again, the frameworks, the ISO 27001 and NIST frameworks we've mentioned are great. If you're a smaller organization and you haven't got something in place, why not start with something simpler like Cyber Essentials Plus? It's a great formal methodical step to get on the roadmap there.
So the second angle of attack, we were talking about reducing impact. Again, thinking about the cyber scenario. So let's assume that you've done all you can to stop it from getting in, but unfortunately it's got through. How can we manage it? So early detection is key, and there are a wide range of threat monitoring systems out there for Office 365, firewall, infrastructure, event alerting. And once detected, you need a trained, dedicated team of people. Well, actually, you need your staff to be able to recognize it and escalate it to the business continuity management team is the next step. And then you need well-practiced contingency plans and teams in place to manage the damage through an efficient response in the recovery and the respond phases. So
we've got some slides now from one of our earlier presentations, which is questions to ask your IT department, or if you are an IT person, questions to ask yourself. So I won't read all of these out, death by PowerPoint. The slides will come around later, but these are some of the most important things to ask. Things like, data encryption, particularly for small MSPs. Have you challenged your IT department or MSP about the procedures? Who has access to the admin accounts? How are your LIIBA procedures in place? These are all areas that introduce other vulnerabilities if not carefully managed. We've seen organizations whose managed service providers indeed store passwords in unencrypted spreadsheets. That is everything, all of the information needed to reconfigure anything on your network or to access anything you want. So if information falls into the wrong hands, the threat actor could do literally anything they want to your IT estate: read, copy, delete all emails and files, send and use your email accounts, pivot further into your own organization, your suppliers, your clients. So that's why I keep banging on about the third-party risk and challenging suppliers. In small IT departments, key staff members hold a mass of undocumented knowledge about organizations in their heads. So documentation is key here as well, particularly if you're going to extend that into things like your business continuity planning as well. Breaches of other companies.
Maybe just to emphasize, this is all about the protection stage. This is all about decreasing your likelihood of something happening. So we're on the protect stage.
Thank you. Important bit of context I forgot to give there. So breaches at other companies, email accounts are leaked that are sold on the dark web. If your passwords are reused in multiple locations, then you've got a higher risk of a hacker using your Amazon or PayPal account to get into your organizational accounts as well, and they'll use them to pivot. So some of the other technical things that we've been talking about include establishing a security baseline. That's a formal exercise to understand your current security posture, again, proportionate to the scale of your organization. If you're an extremely small broker, some of these might be very simple: asset discovery, for example. Supplier audit and challenge again. And one thing that's not on there is training, because that is typically one of the most important vectors for cyber vulnerabilities and ransomware, often via email. How are accounts protected? Do you use a password manager? I think everyone knows now that passwords aren't enough if you don't have two-step MFA, 2FA, all names for two-step authentication, multi-factor authentication. Something you've got, your phone, something your password example is when you log onto your bank account and they send you a text message, or you've got a dongle, or you use your banking app to provide that second step. It is the single most effective thing you can do to secure your organization today. We've seen very, very many accounts of breaches, compromises that would have failed if MFA was correctly enabled. So I'll just skip over this a little bit more. How do you manage company data stored on devices? There we go, a little bit more about the GCHQ survey. If your data is not encrypted when your corporate device is lost or stolen, a laptop left on the train can be accessible to anyone. If they take the hard drive out, they'll see everything on that computer. So for some of you, this might be teaching you to suck eggs, but for others, it is a crucial thing. We worked with an organization in Myanmar during the coup. Nature of their business meant that they expected to be raided by the government at any time, so there could be zero data on any device. They were only used as terminals, and all access were provided via a secure VPN so that nobody could see what websites were browsed to or any data that was being transmitted. That's an extreme example, but best practice means that company data can only be stored on company devices. And that's not financially viable for many smaller organizations, but thankfully lots of new technology allows you to have sort of secure enclaves within those mobile devices, or bring your own devices that can then be effectively wiped remotely. I won't go into the detail of it, but the technology is there. If you don't know about it, please do get in touch. It's bread and butter for us, that sort of thing. So has my business been breached? 20% of the top 99 carriers, insurance carriers, have a high rate of vulnerability to ransomware. We've discussed that. Cisco CEO John Chambers quote there, those who haven't been hacked, people who know they've been hacked and those don't know that they've already been hacked. Carriers and brokers are top targets. During the pandemic, a lot of companies opened up their systems to make them more accessible from home, which is great for agile working. but in a lot of cases that decreases the visibility of the IT estate on who's accessing what. So another good reason to do data audits, data mapping, DPIA, to understand what sensitive information is where. So we've often been called to help heavily regulated companies who've had a cybersecurity incident and then found that the hackers actually had access for several months. And during that time, hackers have had access to mailboxes, files, or other corporate systems and sat there quietly for months, hoovering up data without anyone knowing, either for fraud or espionage. All of those cause reputational damage, of course. So it could be somebody connected to your mailbox right now. How do you know they're not? Does your IT department retain access logs in the event of a breach? Can you create a timeline to know what was accessed and when? Do you have those forensic systems in place? Do you know what data and what information is stored in your mailboxes? It's possible to have alerts on mailboxes, impossible travel activity, for example. If you've just logged on from London and then Paris or Korea, we'll have an alert, log in from unusual locations. Mass deletions, we had to investigate a breach recently for an HR employee of 20 years. Person's entire mailbox had been downloaded, hundreds of passports, bank details, DBS checks, confidential staff communications. The cleanup took weeks. The impact was massive. It would have been very easily prevented with a little bit more planning. Okay, so ransomware can stay on computers for a very long time. 280 days, I think, is a figure I've seen. So it may sit dormant for all that time before it's activated. Catherine, onto your slide here.
So conscious we're probably running a bit over here, so it might just be worth using this slide as a good summary. So really, it's all about planning and preparation. So if you like, at the top of the tree, we have an overarching framework of operational resilience, which and the next stage down, business continuity management, is about management of the crisis, of how the management team manages the crisis at an organizational base and mobilizes resources. And then beneath that, we've got a DR team that are the technical response team that are going to sort the problem out. All those elements need to be in place for a sound operational resilience program. And I don't know if we just need to stop there.
I'll very quickly, we won't dwell on it. It's about methodical, formulaic, formal, considered planning, response and mitigations. I'll explore in my last slide, I think is the one after this, a little bit more challenge your DR plans. I think it's one of the most crucial things to come away from here. Test and challenge them. It's boring, but regular backups of information systems are fundamentally critical. A restore of data is often the only way to recover from, in our scenario here, a serious ransomware attack. We work hard to ensure it's not needed, but good planning is the only way to be confident in it, because even though hosted systems might already include an element of disaster recovery, you only know that when it's tested or make sure it's within your SLA, but you still can't be confident. We took over IT for an organization some time ago. They said they've been changing backup tapes religiously for 2 years. When we checked, it hadn't run for 2 years. People have been changing blank tapes, or backup jobs have been reported, but the scope of the data has grown and the backup tool isn't updated, so not all data can be restored. So test backups in a credible scenario. 3-2-1 rule's great. 3 copies of data on 2 devices, one of which is off-site, so that long tail ransomware can't get hold, or you can at least recover from it. Now I think on to the last slide, questions and answers. I'm sorry we've overrun a little.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I mean, it's interesting because I'm listening to that, and it resonated quite actually with me. I mean, before we get into the questions, just throw a few things out there. Just for those who want to know, the brokers that are actually caught by the operational resilience are those who are under the enhanced SMCR from the SCA. So that's not actually a huge amount of you. However, you do all get impacted because you're part of the value chain, and of course, most of the carriers are caught by it. So you will actually have some form of people knocking on your door at some point if there is an incident. I thought it was interesting you're talking about particularly the small businesses, because a lot of the challenges you've referred to actually have impacted LIIBA in the last couple of months. We actually had a phishing incident. Some of you may already know about that. We are a small business. It was down to one individual actually compromising their IT as their password. Fortunately, that individual, I wouldn't know what OneNote was if it bit on the backside. So when I received the email, strange enough, it was very easy for me to identify that that there was an issue, and very, very quick. But again, you also mentioned that all this information is stored in one person. Well, sadly, LIIBA, that person's me, which is it's a very interesting point. Again, interesting you say about the forensics, because it's a lot of the forensics what we were being asked to provide. And at the time, we actually were on a shared environment with other customers of our supplier, so therefore couldn't provide that information. As of this weekend, we went into our own Azure area, so we can actually do that now. So, we've actually had to respond to exactly what you're saying there because of the pressures put on us by the rest of the market.
It's an interesting point, because there's something called forensic readiness planning, which is exercises we've done for organizations who want to be able to secure convictions, for example, have evidence available in a legally admissible manner, and that requires planning, logging, and collecting data in a very specific way.
Yeah, absolutely, and we are, as of literally this weekend, we are actually in a position to do that now. Hopefully, I'll never have to use. Hopefully, we'll never ever have to use it, but we are. LIIBA itself has a discussion group on operational resilience. If you're not on it, give me a shout. I can put you on there. And if you need some materials, there's some fantastic materials on the LMA website. Quite frankly, I'm not redoing them. There's no point. They've done a really good job, so we'll use theirs. I think one we touched is the fact that operational resilience isn't just necessarily about cyber and things like that. We've all seen the slowness of the XAG at DXC over the last few days, and obviously that systems are getting there. I mean, I sarcastically point out the DXC systems went live in 1986. I started in the market in 1986. I'm old, fat, and slow, and so are those systems. In February, we've just done the dress rehearsal. In February next year, we actually start moving everything to a brand new shiny data center. It's obviously upgrading because we're going from Essex into Kent, so we'll see that, and obviously. Sevenoaks, Royal Tunbridge Wells, and Maidstone are much more salubrious than Basildon and Acton. The final thing is what I thought it was interesting, that I really did like that data you showed there, because that data itself, I think I've been doing some work with the National Cybercrime agencies, and one of the things that we were talking about, particularly on the purchase of cyber insurance, is the lack of data. And it's great to see the fact that data is starting to be gathered, which obviously will allow people, if we have data, we can measure, we can control, and we can actually, it makes it a much more easier underwriting risk. So those are the four things that I wrote down to actually just mention. If nobody has any questions, I'll throw a couple that I was thinking of generally. So it starts off with the mentioning our phishing attack. Well, that actually wound up another firm, and they got hit by something that I've been told is called MFA fatigue. When this was discussed, nobody ever heard of it. Now, for those who don't know, MFA fatigue was basically the MFA got pinged and pinged and pinged until the person who received it just went, oh, forget it, and hit the button and said yes. So that was the first time many people had actually heard of that. So how do we stay up to date with those sort of things?
On the spot, I think that is really, you've answered your own question there. It's training, training, and training. Well, it's vigilance, vigilance, and vigilance. And as part of that, it's training, training, training. People will only be aware of MFA fatigue attacks and the fact that there might be somebody pinging them at, 11:30 at night when they're trying to go to sleep because they've had some training to alert them to the fact, or the fish awareness scenarios. It's one of the most typical vectors into an organization. Training is key, whether it is fish awareness training or knowing where to report a phishing email as a particular example.
Yeah, I mean,
join ORIC. Join ORIC to pull your data.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere they got a good repository of these emerging risks and people are talking about it. It's the best way to keep up to date with that.
I think the NCSC's obviously got some good stuff as well. As I say, because I'm sitting on one of their trust groups, I better wave their flag.
Do you know what they are a superb organization. It's a branding of GCHQ. They've got the resources at their disposal are vast, and they are really doing the right thing at the moment to try and help guide people along. You're quite right. I couldn't endorse it more strongly. Some of their guided how-tos are phenomenally good.
Okay. Just check the chat quickly if anybody popped in. So we must have answered all the questions. That's what it obviously is down to, isn't it? So I mean, we mentioned some of the legislation. We've also got the stuff that's come out of the FCA. We've seen DORA coming out in Europe. Do you see any other? How do you see legislation and regulation changing in this space? Only getting stricter, or?
Well, I think, as with many things, legislation doesn't seem to roll back an awful lot, does it? So I think we can extrapolate all the other legislation we know and think that a lot of this will eventually fall into scope for more people, in the same way as you get fiscal drag with taxes. I think you end up with legislation drag as well. You know, the SMCR legislation applying to larger organizations. I'm quite sure that, as well as being on the governance, you know, on the governance strategies for organizations, it will continue to include smaller organizations. I think irrespective of that, it's important to do the right thing for your business now and worry about being compliant with the legislation now, because the legislation is there to try and drive the people who aren't doing the right things, and everyone here is already mindful of doing the right thing.
So it's interesting what the comment here was. One of the issues with ransomware being dormant, as you say, for 280 days. So, I mean, sorry, there was a question there. So, you know, what are the issues? I mean, my first comment I would say with the issues is because, funny enough, that phishing attack we had, we reckon it had been dormant for a couple of weeks. And of course, all it was doing was it was harvesting the email addresses that were going out of that account. So obviously, from our perspective, what it did is it increased the number of people who got the email.
I guess that comes back to your quote, doesn't it? There are two types of business: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. So it's a question of finding out, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important to note as well that that rootkits, so that is using zero-day exploits, that's things that vulnerabilities that people have no idea exist, or only, for example, you know, law enforcement agencies or national security places, or hackers who've bought zero-day exploits, which are expensive but exist. That's what sits there for a very long time, and it's only when they're activated that they start to wreak havoc. Yeah, it's a great challenge when you can go onto the dark web and buy malware as a service, and that's why everyone should take it more seriously, because it's becoming more commoditized, and anyone with a budget can use it for espionage or for fraud, and we're seeing that. I think that's what's changing.
As I pick up the newspaper today, there's the article about iSpoof that's sitting out there. 70,000 people they reckon victims in the UK. Over basically a company setting up a one-shop stop for bank hacking.
Sounds like a fabulous business, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's been running for 2 years, and I don't think the guy's poor. He's what he is now. He's been arrested. But as I say, there's I'm loath to send anybody to the Daily Mail, but it's in the Daily Mail today. There we go. So there's that. I think we've come into an end there. So I'd just like to thank you for your time. It was very interesting. I mean, it was food for thought for me, so I'm sure it's food for thought for the people on the call. So thank you very much to Catherine and Matthew for their time. I would also like to thank Sophia for sitting in the background and making sure things work, and also for you all attending this session. If you've got any questions, any things that you want to ask offline, because I know sometimes, particularly around the wonderful world of cyber, people don't want to ask in public forum, which is very often half the problem we have with trying to identify some of this stuff. You've got the contact details of Matthew and Catherine. We'll obviously send the slides around later, and this video will be available on our website should you want your colleagues to see it. So once again, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you at the next time we do one of these. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, James.